Hi there, welcome to another edition of Talk Stocks. I'm your host, Keir Reynolds, and today we're lucky enough to have Darrell Rader of Minaurum Gold, trades with the ticker MGG on the Venture Exchange. How you doing today, Darrell?
Great, thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks very much. I'm sure you had a busy day. I see that you guys have announced a private placement. It's been a fairly hot, sort of rambunctious market in the precious metal space. Your company got on my watch list here as you guys have been trading very nicely. You guys have kind of just more than doubled your stock price in about the last sort of month. Been a good sort of performer, and looked at your management team, recognized your name and Peter McGaw. Peter actually, I guess, with a company here, one of his silver things got acquired, or there's a deal announced today with Torex. So pretty interesting opportunity to have you on. Maybe for those of my viewers that don't know who you are, would you mind just giving us a little background on yourself? How'd you get into the business?
Yeah, sure. So I have a finance background. Got into the industry back in '02, which was pretty well the almost the absolute bottom. It was a very dead time in the industry. I was thinking about going into investment banking, but I thought that as a contrarian investor, mining looked kind of exciting growing up in Vancouver. And actually, I just made a list of companies I thought would be interesting, and I phoned a whole bunch of them. And what came out of it is that I found a couple of guys that recommended that I phone a company that had two juniors. One of them was called AngloGold Exploration, and one of them was Impact in the Dominican. They're both these little exploration juniors, and I started off with those, and we turned AngloGold into a big drilling company, took Impact out of exploration and into mining in Mexico, and sort of since that time, I've been a silver bug and focused on Mexico. So spent about 9 years with that group. At the end of my tenure there, I started a company called Defiance Silver, was the lead director there for well north of a decade, brought the team in, the projects into that company. I left in 2021. And through that whole process, I was speaking a lot of silver panels, especially at the early silver summits. Got to know Peter McGaw as sort of acting as the de facto public face of Impact at all those conferences. Got to know, Brad Cook and Bob Archer and all the guys that had their silver junior miners there. And it was through one of those presentations that Peter asked me to join a new vehicle that he had started, which is Minaurum Gold. But actually, in the beginning, as a private vehicle, its name was Mag Gold because it shared a lot of the same team as Mag Silver and backers. So we took the company public, focused on, like Mag Silver, big tier one style discoveries in Mexico, primarily in the gold space. Made a number of discoveries, JV'd some, dropped some others just because they didn't meet our threshold. And it was through that cycle that we came across the Alamos Silver Project in 2017. And that's been our flagship basically since our discovery hole was drilled there a year later.
Hey, excellent. Well, pretty good time to be both a gold and a silver focused explorer. So have gold in the name and be focused on silver. And Peter's not a bad fellow to have involved. Maybe for those of my viewers that don't know sort of Peter, maybe you can explain just a little bit more about sort of the legend of Peter and why his name means something in our business.
Yeah, so, Peter has a lot of degrees to his name, a lot of awards, I guess most notably the Thayer Lindsay Award for, I guess, the highest ranked discovery of the year, which was probably about 7-8 years ago at the PDAC. Peter's claim to fame was really going into Fresnillo, which is a sort of a silver district in Mexico, and tracing historical veins. And what he basically found was a group of historical mines here, in a valley between the two. And he believed that there was no reason geologically that the vein system stopped over the valley, or in the valley, I should say. And he drilled in the middle, and that's become Osisko, which went from I guess when I met him, a $7 million market cap, and he just sold the company for over $2 billion. So had a lot of success there. Discovered a project called Cinco de Mayo, which was a big discovery, was part of the team that actually he discovered Platosa, which became Exelon Silver for many years, the highest operating silver mine in Mexico, highest grade. So a lot of silver to his credit, and today he's recognized as a CRD expert, carbonate replacement deposit. So a good guy to have on your Rolodex when you're looking for those big major style deposits.
Excellent. So you gave us a little bit of an elevator pitch, but would you mind, for someone first time sort of hearing of your company? I know you've been trading up a storm, you've been trading a lot of shares and everything, but for those, maybe some of my viewers that don't know what the company is all about, would you mind just giving the kind of the pitch again? You mentioned you got a flagship. You started out as a
so
generator.
basically,
you guys all
we're so we're focused on Mexico, even though we've more recently acquired some advanced projects in the United States, just as a bit of an insurance policy. But our focus, our time and money is focused on the Alamos Silver Project. That is a historic silver district located in southern Sonora, very good area to work in. It was one of these big, rich historical districts built by the Spaniards, shut down at the time of the Mexican Revolution in the early 1900s. It had over 200 million ounces of silver mined out of it, so it does rank as one of the bigger districts historically in Mexico. And we went into the project. It looked completely like a jigsaw puzzle. There was a local Mexican family that took about 6 years to consolidate. They spent over $2 million consolidating it. The family is a family that does infrastructure, builds lots of large projects down in Mexico. Their first mining project they did was Santa Elena, which became Silvercrest #1. And since then, they focused on building what's now Mexico's largest drilling company. They're a mine construction company. They just built Las Chispas for Silvercrest #2. And they do basically for Silvercrest, they did everything but geology. And at Minaurum, they do everything but geology. We run the programs, but they do permitting, drilling, basically everything you need, sort of a one-stop shop. They're a bigger shareholder of Minaurum. So we're basically in a project today where we are drilling off our maiden resource. That's going to come here probably in September in time for Beaver Creek. So what we're working on is a deadline, which is about the second week of September. And kind of what differentiates us from most is we're getting those pre-resource out here shortly, but we're also fully permitted for underground mining. And in Mexico, underground permits, or any production permits for that matter, are a long and drawn-out process to achieve. We've had the background of having put multiple mines into production, and we decided when we made the discovery here in 2017 to start permitting simultaneously. And today we're very excited to have the permits in place and the maiden resource on its way.
Excellent. Well, that's a very key point. I'm glad you brought that up about the permitting. That's usually something everybody leaves right to the end. And by golly, investors and shareholders are pretty tired at that point. So good that you guys have gotten ahead of it. Good point to bring up. In terms of the style of mineralization, everybody's talking. There's not that many actual sort of silver companies. However, it's been a popular place to say, and there's a lot of these guys that are like silver equivalent, and they've got maybe more lead, zinc, other sort of base metal sort of things. Are you guys sort of a pure silver company, or what's the makeup of your kind of project, and what do you think it'll sort of come in at?
So the Alamos project has a bit of a polymetallic nature to it, but it is, I'd say on average about 70% silver, and then the remainder is split between copper, gold, zinc, and lead. It is a project where we've had multiple pulses of mineralization that have sort of overlapped one another in the veins. So you have high-grade copper and silver together from top to bottom. The only real metal that changes as you drill deeper is typically you see gold starting to get elevated. But yeah, it's definitely a primary silver project.
And in terms of some of the drilling, Sonora, and then there's other places in Mexico. What's some of the drilling results that you guys have had? Is it sort of narrow width, high grade? Is it more broad sort of mineralization? Could you just kind of explain a little bit without having to remember exactly your drill results?
Yeah, no. So these veins pinch and swell. So these are epithermal veins, and we always say they're kind of like a string of pearls, and that they go bigger and they sort of pinch, and when they swell, you get your silver shoots or your primary silver deposits. In our deposits that we're drilling off for the maiden resource, what we're seeing is in the pinches, you can quite often get about a meter widths of 300-400 grams silver, if not higher. The swells where it starts expanding, that's where you can get pretty good meterage. I'm just thinking our last two news releases were drilling off one of the silver shoots for the maiden resource. The last news release, I believe, was about 10 meters of 480 grams per ton silver. The news release before that was almost 38 meters of 330 grams per ton. That was silver equivalent, but predominantly silver. So you can see the pinches are in the meter or two, but the swells can be in the tens of meters. So it's a kind of system, because it's also extremely steeply dipping, that's just perfect for underground mining, and the widths are excellent for mechanized underground mining.
Great, it runs right to the center of the earth, right?
We'll see. Haven't drilled that deep yet, but.
And my next question was going to be, what sort of drilling have you done? How many sort of meters and kind of what depth have you drilled down to?
Yeah, we've stayed relatively shallow. I'd say our deepest holes have sort of gone down to about the 300-meter level. Historical production, especially from the main mine called the Quintero mine, that had over 100 million ounces extracted out of the one mine. That one went to a depth of just under half a kilometer, so 500 meters. So we know there's some depth extent on the system, and that mine is probably open at depth too. We just haven't taken the time to drill below it because it'd be a very deep hole. But at this point, we have done approximately 60,000 meters of drilling, and there's been about another 10,000 meters drilled historically between the 50s and the 80s. But the project has not been in production since about 1910.
And was there ever an historic resource, or would this be the very first sort of like resource in modern times that you guys will be putting out?
There is one target on the northern part of the project that does have a historic resource. We are not quite sure if we can rely on it yet. We don't have enough holes into it, but the holes, I think we've done about 7 so far, have been standing up pretty well with what the historical numbers were. That small target has about 15 million ounces at 300 grams per ton silver. It had no, I don't believe they assayed for anything else, base metals or gold. So that's sort of what this project looks like when you look at it sort of on a top-down basis. It's a project where there's over 26 separate veins. A lot of those veins are stacked veins, so even the individual vein is more of a vein system where you get 4 or 5 of them in close proximity. Some of them are more base metal rich. Most of them are very silver rich. What you are probably going to see over the next year and a half of drilling is you're going to see us come out with resources where, we advance 2 or 3 targets at a time to the resource stage. These 2 or 3 targets may all be sort of in the 20 to 30 million ounce silver equivalent size. And that sort of that historical resource kind of fits into that general size, but it's a kind of situation where I think maybe a year out over a 3 square kilometer area, we may have 7 or 8 of these shoots that add up to well north of 100 million ounces. And that's the sort of the interim exploration target. That's only covering about 3,000 hectares of the project. We have 37,000 hectares. There's a lot more to be discovered. But strategically looking at it, we want to advance sort of a bite-sized number of these deposits to their maiden resource. First, get out the initial resource in September. It'll probably be in that 50 million plus range ounces silver equivalent. Then go drill a lot more aggressively on the discoveries we've already made, but we haven't drilled off, and we think we have that capacity to get over 100 million ounces with more drilling. And then at that point, we have to decide, what makes more sense? Is it just continue to drill, add more and more ounces, or is it to advance into production as quick as possible? We have those production permits in the place. That is a bit of, as you mentioned, a bit of the cart before the donkey or before the horse. Not quite the order most companies do it in, but we're getting into a market where if you're anywhere near production, you're getting a lot of value. And most of our peers in Mexico, have the big resources, but they don't have the permits. So they just keep drilling because they really have nothing else to do till they get their permits. And for us, I think you get to a point mathematically even where you can decide, if you're going to take this much dilution to get another 50 million ounces versus the same amount of dilution to get to production, what's going to add more value to shareholders?
Excellent. Well, thanks for that. You answered a few questions with that response. I was going to ask how big your property is. It sounds like very sizable there with 37,000 hectares or so. You answered a little bit in terms of what you think that this initial kind of resource would sort of look like. And then I remember back in the day, back when we had our previous mining cycle, sort of like '09 through 12. 100 million ounces of silver, depending on what it was going to be, open pit or underground, and where it was in the world, it was kind of around 100 million ounces where a company might decide whether they put it into production or look to monetize it. Do you think that's still sort of the sweet spot, or has it gotten bigger, or what other important factors now are sort of considered? You've identified one, permitting. What other?
Yeah. Permitting's a big one. If you're just going on size of deposit, I think in my opinion, and having talked to a lot of my friends that are newsletter writers, we all have sort of the similar view that there's kind of three tiers of silver projects out there. You want to get to 100 million ounces just because that seems to be the catalyst that really creates a re-rate. But that being said, Silvercrest, Vizsla, even Gatos, their initial resources were all sort of in that 40, 50 million ounce mark. So getting that usually lowers the cost of capital considerably. Once you get to 100, I think you're looking at different ways that these assets really develop, because when you're in the sort of that tier one phase, and tier one, I would say, is high grade, north of 300 grams per ton silver, you get a much different valuation in the market. You look at the Vizslas, the GoGolds, the Gatos valuation, MAG. MAG only owned 40% of their deposit and still got 2.1 billion for it. You look at those kind of projects, once you get over 300 grams and a bigger size resource, you can quite often get anywhere from $5 up to MAG, which I think got about $18 an ounce in the ground valuation. You get premium valuations. When you're in that sort of 150 to 300 gram range, well, then you get a bit of a different valuation, quite often closer to that $1 to $2. And then when you get below 100 grams per ton silver, then you're into kind of the optionality range, the discovery silvers before they went into production in Ontario. But, those kind of deposits you see quite often, but they're usually valued at 20, 25 cents an ounce in the ground. So for me, it's a matter of not just having the permits, but also ensuring that we get a resource that places us in the top tier, where the top tier are the guys that, can make money at almost any silver price. And just as a rule of thumb, I'd mention as the last point is in Mexico, the current underground average silver grade that's being mined is 150 grams. So that's the basic average right now, industry-wide. So if you're getting a resource 300 grams north, you're more than double the current operating grade in Mexico. And that sort of qualifies you as a high-grade operation with hopefully much better metrics in the market, ultimately.
Excellent. So what type of catalysts do you have sort of coming up for us? Do you have any drills on the ground turning now? What things can we look forward to over the next 3 to 6 months?
So we took a brief pause here. We still have one more news release of drill results to come out, but we're going to be mobilizing 4 rigs here very shortly, probably this week. Those are going to be pounding out a lot of results between now and I'd say the end of the year. The biggest catalyst besides drill results is going to be our maiden resource, which is going to come out sometime in September. Between now and then, we're also doing some other items. As I said, we have monetized companies in the past. We have built mines. We know what investors are looking for, but we also have a very good idea of what the industry is looking for. So one of the things we've done internally is built a bit of a proactive checklist of things that majors are going to want to see to make us an acquisition target at some point. That's things like long-term community agreements. So we just signed this year 2 brand new 29-year agreements. So the communities are covered exploration through exploitation. We're about halfway through sourcing all the water we need for a potential mining operation. We're about 2/3 of the way through getting explosives permits. We have infrastructure programs underway. Go ahead.
When you get that explosive permit, you call me.
Will do. And we didn't invite you to come down and see the little bunker we'd have to build for it. But yeah, it's, the thing is, you want to check off these boxes when you can check them off. And you don't want to wait right till the end when everything's being rushed. So we've been proactive on that. A lot of those things are items that will really add value to the project, not necessarily investor catalysts, but I believe, we're going to do a lot more metallurgical testing. The immediate I guess you'd say reward of good met testing is that will actually increase the grade of the maiden resource, because when you put out a resource, it needs to calculate and factor in recoveries. So you're going to see a lot of drilling, a maiden resource in September, some met testing, and probably a few other goodies over the next few months here.
Excellent. 4 drill rigs is exciting. Will they all be running core, or will you have RC and diamond? What
Yeah, all core. Yep, all core. We like to see the vein, and that's the best way to get an idea of strike and what the mineralization looks like exactly. Because when you have these stacked veins, you really need to be on it where you see the zonation, and that gives you basically kind of the treasure map that'll lead you to higher grades.
Now, traditionally speaking, like historically, previously, Mexico tended to be a lower cost place to do exploration in terms of like drilling, cost per meterage, and things like that. You typically got further for the amount of money. Is that still the case today?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's definitely gone up, and you can blame inflation, a number of different factors, but everything's gone up. Canada's gotten a lot more expensive. I spent the first 9 years of my career in the drilling industry and mining, but drilling was half my time. And, in Mexico, we still drill at a very good rate on a base rate. We are probably in that $130 US a meter range. Pretty well any core size, kind of in that range. That would be, compared to the US would probably be about 200 a meter for core. But it's very difficult to find core rigs in the US. It's mostly reverse circulation. In Canada, if you see a lot of these Yukon deals, they're spending $400 or $500 Canadian a meter. So, it's still cheap, comparatively speaking. Sinking shafts, from my experience in Mexico, is still a lot cheaper, probably 1/5 of the comparable cost of doing something like that in the United States. So, yeah, I would say it's still cheaper. Fuel is about the same cost, but even the cost of the geological team is a lot less in Mexico. So you're typically, rule of thumb in my experience, you're looking at about anywhere from half to maybe a third of the cost of what you'd be seeing in Canada or the United States for building a similar sized mine.
Well, thanks for answering that. Good to hear. So you got your maiden resource coming out. You got a bunch of drilling results. You're going to pound out the results until the end of the year, as you sort of said. That's great to hear. Let's talk cap structure. So you guys just recently announced, if I'm not mistaken, you might have announced something today related to a financing. What's your cap table look like today? And then what do you think your cap table will approximately look like sort of post financing?
So we announced a financing of $5 million at 25 cents this morning with a half warrant. That financing has been upsized. I think we'll probably end up raising closer to $9 million. That would leave us with about 430 million shares out, something around there. We do not trade like we have 430 million shares out. Over 60% of our shares are held in Europe with long-term shareholders, family offices, private equity groups. One of the things I did early in my career was when we started spending time on the silver side of things, and this is a similar story as Peter with Mag Silver, Exelon Silver, even First Majestic, Endeavour Silver. Most of us, when we were building silver mines in the early 2000s, financed out of Europe. That was the most readily available capital. The US was still in the grip of the internet bubble and all those kinds of things, and the Europeans were more the hard asset investors. So we've always targeted European investors. So I would say we'll have approximately 430 million shares out, but we trade like we have maybe 150 million shares out. We trade on average about 500,000 shares a day between the various exchanges we're listed in. And as I mentioned, most of those are European investors. This current financing we're doing will bring in some larger North American institutions.
And what does management sort of ownership look like? Do you own some shares?
Yeah, we have I'd say about insiders, management have about 5% shareholding in the company. A number of us have been buying over the last 4 months here. So yeah, we're believers in the company. We haven't sold any shares, and look forward to getting these resources drilled off.
Excellent. And what do you think about, let's talk a little macro talk. You've been in the market for quite a while. What do you think of sort of the stage that we're at in terms of the metals environment?
Yeah, I would say this window if you want to call it a window, it's more than a window. This move is probably a better label for it. This move is a lot more reminiscent to me of the kind of move I saw in silver in '09, in '02 and '03, where it's not just in silver, but in gold. Gold always did, started off first, silver kind of follows, and then you play that catch up where silver outperforms and the junior silver equities really outperform at that point. This cycle is so different from like the window we saw in 2020, the window we saw in 2016, where the silvers took off there for about 6 months. This seems a lot more like, as I said, 2002 to 2003, where you finally saw money coming back into the industry and it trickled down from the majors to the mid tiers to the junior miners to the resource plays, and then ultimately to the grassroots players. I don't think we've seen the grassroots players really move yet, but we have seen the resource plays start to move, and that's probably a good 3-4 months after the major started moving. And so that to me is a sign of a much stronger long-term move than these short windows, which, were kind of fun. 2020 was fun for 6 months there, where everybody went up 500 or 600% in about a 4-month period, but then we gave back a lot of those gains. Between '02 and '07, we would test we would test the breakout, we'd then consolidate a little bit, and then break out again. There was a much more kind of like stair type increase in the price of the commodities and the juniors. And I think we're seeing that today. And that to me shows that we're into a multi-year bull market. And I think we're right at the beginning stages of it here. So that's exciting because those allow you to develop assets. And at the same time, running a company, you have to make sure that you can monetize your asset in this market. So that's why I mentioned, we want to get this initial resource out, get a secondary update early next year, and then maybe look at pushing this to production as aggressively as possible because we want to monetize this asset in this move of the market here.
Excellent. I guess we're going to sort of wrap up. I really appreciate this for kind of a first look on Minaurum. You've been a really interesting interview there, Darrell. Thanks for speaking passionately about the company. I guess I was gonna ask a little bit about what's a typical day in the life look like for you? How many hats are you wearing? What are you doing? What's keeping you busy?
Yeah, it's I'm originally from Vancouver, but I had to move down to Arizona to be a little closer to the project, and it keeps the flights a little shorter. So I go frequently down. I'm a bit more of an operator, hands-on kind of guy, because especially the first 9 years of my career was spent a lot in the field. So I would say, probably half the day is, of course, marketing, doing, talking to brokers, keeping the analysts up to date. And the other half is operations, managing our team. Last week, we announced that we brought on the senior resource modeling team of Silvercrest. We brought them over from Kerr Mines, integrated them. They're a great help, but those were 4 new individuals to join our current about 6 guys on the ground. So there's some day-to-day management involved there, just making sure that everyone's focused on the same goal here. But yeah, I'd say it's sort of half and half marketing, and the rest of the day is just making sure that everything from permits, community relations continue, drill preparation. There's always something to be done on the ground to make sure that things run smoothly.
What's one thing that keeps you up at night?
Until about 2 weeks ago was this market and these crazy little 4-week windows where it was like, okay, if you want to finance for this year, we have a 4-week window where everybody's excited, and then it's going to slam shut for 2 years. It's a really tough way to advance an asset. So, part of the idea is I told my team here, and we're all in agreement, is once you get that initial resource out, and as long as it's where you say it's going to be and it's going to be higher grade, that also insulates you against some of these market whims. The big players that have all been taken out, MAG, Gatos, even Silvercrest, they had good resources. They were able to raise in good and bad markets. And that's really what you want to be. You want to be in a position where people recognize you as maybe one of the next, big names in the silver space in Mexico. And that means you're advancing the asset right through every window. But yeah, until about 2 weeks ago, that was what even the first week of this market that's really been returning now as money trickles into the junior space, you always have that nagging doubt that, maybe tomorrow there's going to be peace in the world, gold falls $4. Silver falls $4, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. I don't think we're singing, that old Christmas carol, Peace on Earth right now. It's looking like there's a lot of uncertainty, and that, of course, has investors running towards insurances, such as gold and silver.
Hey, Darrell, that's about the best answer for anybody that I've asked that, so thank you. Most people don't want to admit to anything that keeps them up at night, but I really appreciate that answer, and it's a great answer. Any final thoughts before we sort of wrap up here?
No, I think we've covered it all. I think there's an exciting, 6 months in store for Minaurum, but also just for general silver investors. I think we're getting into that real, correction phase where silver catches up to gold and the equities catch up. And it's one of the most fun rides that you can have when you're invested in the silver space.
Hey, well, I really appreciate a chance to catch up and hear, and if you did give a first look on the company, and look forward to following your progress, and we'll welcome you back. Thanks so much, Darrell.
Thank you, sir.